جز دو کشور، یکی ایران یکی مصر. شما بودین، هستید و خواهید بود. یه وقتی من رفته بودم امریکا، یه وقتی توی مصاحبه گفتم این رو که آقای کیسنجر گفته بود میخوام ملاقاتی با شما بکنم، منم دلم می‌خواست ببینم ایشون اومد حرفای مختلف راجع هسته‌ای و مسائل دیگه زد و بعد گفت شما میخواید با ما یه رابطه استراتژیک داشته باشید. من گفتم ما با شما رابطه نداریم، شما میگید رابطه استراتژیک، چرا این سوال هم من میکنید؟ این روی میز گفت ما بعد از جنگ جهانی خودمون خط خطی کردیم، کشورها رو اسم گذاشتیم، یکی رو گذاشتیم فلسطین، یکی رو گذاشتیم نمیدونم سوریه، یکی گذاشتیم ترکیه، یکیش عراق فلان، جز دو کشور، یکی ایران یکی مصر. شما بودین، هستید و خواهید بود. ما چاره جزئی نداریم با شما راه بیاییم. یه آدم با فکر وقتی سابقه تاریخی ملت رو بشناسه اینجوری حرف میزن، نمیگه تسلیم. این ملت گنده تر از شما نتونستن تسلیمش بکنن.
Where is Israel in a few years from now?
If you look at the main beneficiary of this war, it is Israel. Because Israel has an ambition called the Greater Israel Project. They believe their God, Yahweh, promised to their ancestor Abraham all the land from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates. According to game theory, the main constraint to Israel achieving the Greater Israel Project is actually not Iran, but America. Because America guarantees the military safety of the GCC. And so it needs to figure out how to remove America from the equation. This war has shown the limitations of American power. The American people do not want this war. And so it's very possible that America is forced to withdraw from the Middle East, which allows Israel to remake the Middle East in its own image.
In our closed-door briefings, we learned that that is in fact not a goal of our war plan. That it is not a goal of the war to destroy their nuclear program. Which is, of course, not surprising because you cannot destroy Iran's nuclear program from the air. You cannot, A, destroy knowledge. You cannot hunt down with missiles every single Iranian scientist that knows how to build a nuclear reactor. And the material is buried so far under the ground to be immune to an air campaign. So, yes, it stands to reason that one of the goals of this war is not to destroy the nuclear program. But then why is the President and the Department of Defense telling us that the point of the war is to destroy their nuclear program?
Where is Israel in a few years from now?
So if you look at the main beneficiary of this war, it is Israel. Because Israel has an ambition called the Greater Israel Project, which is what they believe that their God, Yahweh, promised to their ancestor, Abraham. And so they believe that Yahweh promised Abraham all the land from the Nile in Egypt to Euphrates in Iraq. If you look at the entire map, it also extends to Anatolia, which is southern Turkey, and even into Saudi Arabia. So if you look at what's happening, well, it's convenient in that the GCC is being destroyed. Saudi Arabia will probably be drawn into this war. It is possible Turkey will be drawn into this war as well. And this war allows Israel to remake the Middle East in its own image. Also, if you think about it, according to game theory, the main constraint to Israel achieving the Greater Israel Project is actually not Iran, but America. Because America guarantees the military safety and protection of the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, these nations. And so if Israel is become dominant, it's become the hegemon of the Middle East, it needs to figure out how to remove America from the equation. And quite honestly, this war has shown the limitations of American power. It's really annoyed the American people. The American people do not want this war. And the American people don't even understand why America is still in the Middle East. And so it's very possible that regardless of what happens in this war, America is forced to withdraw from the Middle East, in which case Israel is able to achieve its Greater Israel Project. So if you look at the domestic situation in Israel, Israel no longer behaves rationally. It is sort of overtaken by eschatological fever. Right? So if you look at videos coming out of Israel, there are rabbis going around saying that this war in the Middle East, even though it's destroying Tel Aviv, it's good for us because this will lead to the coming of our Messiah. So they believe that it is when Israel is under the most strain, when the very existence of Israel is threatened, then God will intervene because the Jewish people will come together as a nation again and commit themselves, renew their faith in God. And once God sees the blind, trusting, absolute faith of the Jewish people, then he will save his people by sending his Messiah, who will then redeem the Jewish people. So another way of saying this is secular temporal matters don't really matter. This war in the Middle East, not an issue. What matters is divinity. What matters is our relationship with God.
Yes.
So what matters is...
How is a war in a country half the world away, funded by the taxes pulled from my check,
politics? Santiago?
Hi, good evening. I'm a waiter at a local restaurant in Queens, a full-time college student who sleeps an average of 4 hours at night and is still thousands in debt. How is a war in a country half the world away, funded by the taxes pulled from my check, helping me in any way?
Yeah, it's look, it's a valid and it's a tough question. I know for certain, and if we just look at the things the president has put in place in terms of housing and big corporations that are buying up whole neighborhoods, the tax cuts that he extended with the big, beautiful bill, the energy policies that we're putting in place to not only make us self-sufficient, but to lessen these dependencies and lower prices, even lowering prescription drug prices. The president's absolutely focused on what you're seeing day in and day out that's affecting your pocketbook. At the same time, as commander-in-chief, he has to weigh the risks and make the tough decisions, facing some hard truths. We cannot have a world with a genocidal terroristic regime that holds not only your generation but the next generation hostage with nuclear weapons. And those are the tough calls that the American people elected him to make.
I have studied every air campaign since World War I. This is my specialty. I spent 3 years teaching conventional targeting strategy for the U.S. Air Force. I've studied leadership decapitation in detail. I've modeled the bombing of Fordow, the regime change in Iran, for 20 years. So this is something I know quite a bit about. And literally 10 days ago, I started on Substack, The Escalation Trap, because I worried exactly watching the Armada being built, we would fall into the escalation trap. And that's what's happened. We are now in the grip of the escalation trap, or the smart bomb trap, to be more precise, where the illusion of the 100% tactical success, which is real, it's the success of the bombs blowing up the targets, is not false. It creates the illusion of control of escalation. And that is the smart bomb trap, and that is what has gripped us right now. And the problem is that once we drop those bombs and once we announce regime change is our goal, and we had no other tools, trying to do this from the air, this has never worked in over 100 years. This is not like it works sometimes or rarely works. I'm choosing my words carefully. President Trump is up against the weight of history here. And it's the illusion of the smart bombs being near perfect in destroying their target. And the problem is when those bombs fall, they change politics in the target. They inject nationalism into the regime. They inject nationalism into the society. And they essentially fuse the regime and society against the air power attacker. And this is what you are seeing, because now society and the regime are taking more risky steps. And they do things that no one anticipated before. And that failure to anticipate the worst case, that has happened numerous times with smart bombs. That's just what happened in the last 36 hours.
Why are Republicans so interested in Bill and Hillary Clinton? It's because they're trying to distract from the fact that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files thousands and thousands of times. in those files, there's highly disturbing allegations of Donald Trump raping children, of Donald Trump threatening to kill children. So I encourage the press to go look at these allegations, and I'm highly disturbed that Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche just got the law wrong. Yesterday, he said, essentially, that it is not a crime to party with Jeffrey Epstein. Well, that's actually not correct. If Jeffrey Epstein was human trafficking minors for these sex parties, and you show up and patronize the establishment at that party, yes, you're guilty, because patronizing is part of the law, of the federal sex trafficking law. So Deputy General Todd Blanche just got that wrong, which maybe explains why they aren't investigating all these folks, including Donald Trump. He needs to read the law and investigate these people. He also needs to resign, not only for not knowing the law, but a massive, not only screw up, but the biggest privacy violation in history.
I would say that, look, Israel is a one-bomb country. One bomb takes them out. And that's why it's so existential to Israel. But we can also see now with this offensive missile shield that Iran had to, in other words, protect the nuclear effort, and what it's doing, the havoc that it's raising out there with Middle Eastern countries.
What is the reason, if the nuclear program isn't the reason, as poor Ted Cruz, I never thought I'd put those three words together, is over there talking about nukes? And we know that the intelligence did not suggest that an attack was imminent from Iran. What is left? Why are we at war with Iran?
Great question. Yeah, great question. I mean, the simplest explanation, might be the one that they gave 24 hours in, that they've kind of tried to backtrack since then, which is that Israel made us do it. That Bibi decided on this timeline, Netanyahu decided he wanted to attack, and he convinced Trump to join him by scaring Trump into believing that U.S. assets in the region would be at risk, and so Trump was better off just joining Netanyahu. I hope that isn't the full explanation, but you're right. As we are now hearing that the nuclear program is not part of their targeting campaign, as we're now more confident that even harder line leadership is taking hold, as the Strait of Hormuz is still being shut down, even as we get their Navy, what's left as the explanation? It might just be that Israel forced our hand. And how weak does that make the United States look? How weak are we if our allies can force us into wars of choice that are bad for U.S. national security interests?
Who do you think has more endurance? Frankly, I think the Iranians do. I think they have survived, or I'm speculating that they probably think they survived the brunt of U.S. and Israeli attacks in these first 2 weeks, and they've managed to effect a transition of power. Their institutions remain largely intact. There is little fracturing that we can see. Maybe there's more behind the scenes, but little fracturing within those institutions. And we haven't yet seen the Iranian people come out on the street to protest. Yet on our side, obviously, we see prices going up at the pump. We see a lot of concern about the economic pressures. What will this mean? The White House, as it looks through a political lens at times with regard to the midterm elections. So, and we see President Trump sending different messages about what, on one hand, he's saying the right thing, that we have to put future security, making sure Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, over short-term price increases. But on the other hand, he's talking as if the war has already ended. We won in the first hour or so, as he said, and maybe preparing the United States for some type of exit or off-ramp here in the next week or so.
I have to say at the unlikely end of the expectation ladder, but if you were, what advice would you give him? He clearly, I think, wants to get out of this, but he doesn't seem to really know how he can do that, which doesn't look like a crushing defeat or retreat. What would you advise him to do, which would be a skillful and achievable way of extricating America from this war?
I've thought long and hard about this, and I've talked to a number of very smart people, a number of my friends who are what I would call spinmeisters. They can figure out almost always how to get out of a mess. And I don't think anybody can come up with a good solution for solving this problem.
שלום לנוכל! נוכל! נוכל סדום נוכל סדום נוכל
أنا استفدت إيه؟ أنا استفدت إيه؟ أنا استفدت إيه؟
ناقصاك